Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have you had the talk with your child? No, I'm not talking about the birds and the bees. I'm talking about the conversation African American and Latino families have with their children about interacting with police. It's all about how to behave, where to place your hands, how to speak to the officer, how to hopefully come home safe after the encounter. Many white families are surprised that such a conversation happens in minority families. To them, it's simply a matter of courtesy. But African American and Latino parents will tell you it's literally a matter of life or death. The Talk. It's coming up next on Another View.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Today, we begin a conversation that we will continue during our Race Let's Talk About It Town Hall next Tuesday, February 21st at 6:30 at the Fort Monroe Theater in Hampton. The town hall is open to everyone, but we request that you please register. Go to whro.org/talkaboutrace to sign up. The topic is The Talk. It's a conversation that Black and Latino families have with their children about interacting with police. This is a conversation that has been happening in minority families for decades, but has recently met mainstream consciousness with the police-involved deaths of Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Walter Scott, Laquan McDonald, and many, many others. Now, there is debate about the talk. Some believe it's simply teaching kids manners. Others say having the talk perpetuates racism. Yet many in the minority community say that it's a matter of life or death. Here to share their perspectives on the talk and how you should interact with police are Dwayne Bryant, author of The Stop, Improving Police and Community Relations. Hello, Dwayne. How are you?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining us today. And Amos Jones, Associate Professor of Law at Campbell University Law School. Hello, Amos. Welcome back.
Good afternoon. It's good to be back.
Right. Now, PBS, this coming Monday at 9 p.m. is running a documentary called The Talk. And before, gentlemen, we get into our conversation, I want to play a quick clip from the documentary.
I give the talk to my nephew, to my nieces, to any young person in my family. You have to, because that's the reality that we live with, right?
My mom's conversation with me is whatever they say, you do, because I want to make sure you come home.
You have to be the bigger person. It's better to let them, frisk you, ask for ID, say what they have to say, and go about their way. And that's what I want my son to know.
Don't get arrogant, don't get pompous. Just be quiet. Ask why you're getting arrested. Say I have a right to a phone call and I have a right to a lawyer. And keep your mouth shut.
When we were taught at an early age that the police meant us no good, not to trust them, we couldn't run to the police. The police were not our saviors. They were not there to protect us.
There are good cops and there are bad cops. There are cops that make it like hell out here. They're cops that will change your world. The police have changed lives that were going in certain directions, that were going in directions of just living, good directions. And a police officer could come and change your family's life forever.
So, Dwayne, the talk, this is nothing new to you. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is nothing new. And as I hear that, man, it's just like, wow, it's sad on one hand, it's empowering on another hand, but it is reality on every hand.
And so did your family give you the talk when you were growing up?
My mama gave us the talk, the belt, the whooping, the everything.
What about you, Amos?
Yes.
This is nothing new to you either, is it?
No, when you raise Black children, you have to be aware of the traps and tricks that are going to confront them from very early ages. So I never received the talk as such. In my household, learning was a continual process. So as events would transpire, things were explained to us. Now, I was fortunate. I was a little boy when Eyes on the Prize, which is the best thing that ever aired on television in history, aired on PBS. And we watched it as a family and certainly could relate to everything because that was our tradition, our church tradition, our intellectual tradition. It all just made sense. And so that was an opportunity as well to get kind of the theoretical underpinnings of why it is that Black boys have to watch their back all the time, everywhere, always.
So why do you think that it is such a surprise to non-minority families that this conversation happens? And what is your reaction, and I'll start with you, Dwayne, to those who say, well, all you're doing is just teaching people to be respectful. What's the big deal?
Right, and that's interesting you say that because I've spoken to white people and they say, hey, we have this conversation with our children as well. And honestly, many of them truly don't fully understand that there's a huge disparity between the interactions with Black children and police and white children with police. I think that one thing I would caution, though, is because sometimes the talk can be more destructive than it can be constructive. I believe the talk should be empowering. I believe the talk should be building leadership because if you're telling your child the police is just bad and they're here to arrest you and they're going to harm you, then you're creating fear. And I know even as an adult, if I have an encounter and if in my mind it's a bunch of fearful thoughts, I'm nervous, I'm fidgety, I'm creating an environment that's not conducive for a positive police encounter. So I think parents have to be very careful how they have the talk. Just because you have the talk, it does not mean it's constructive and it's going to be beneficial to your child.
Okay, so let's get down into it then. What are some of the things and how should that conversation happen? What are the important points that you think need to be covered in the talk?
Sure. Well, one thing that I have in my book, I talk about the first thing when I come to a stop sign. I stop, I look both ways, and then I proceed with caution. And I tell young people it's the same thing with the police encounter. What you have to do is stop. What you have to do is think. You have to be calm. Don't think that, this man is going to kill me because if you do, or woman, if you do, that's going to create a level of nervousness in you that you may not be able to control all of your responses and reactions. So I say, listen, think about your future. Think about where you're going in life. Think about, do you want this 20-minute engagement to dictate or alter the entire course of your life? And you don't want to give anybody that kind of power. The second thing I tell them is that in every police encounter, you have power as well. Because I've heard parents tell their children, you don't have any power. The police have all the power. And I say, no, that's incorrect. Your child has power of their words, of their tone, of their body language. They don't dictate the full outcome, but they do have power. And to teach your child to be powerless is just crazy to me. I don't advocate that at all. So I tell them to think calmly, to respond calmly, to think about who you are, think about your future, and don't allow this reaction or this outcome or this encounter, rather, to dictate the rest of your life. Now, there are racist officers out there. Let's be real about it. There are police officers, according to Dr. Atiba Goff, who dehumanize our Black kids. So if those children find those officers, then they definitely want to take heed to the book and what I'm saying, because we want them to be sure they get home safely.
So, Amos, when you are stopped, what are your rights? How should you handle it?
Well, as a matter of law, the police officer is in control of that situation. We need to remember that when you're stopped, unless it's a stop and frisk situation like in New York where there's no reasonable suspicion, there's something that has gotten the attention of the officer. So to remember that they are really doing their job. Sometimes they approach you with a, quote, attitude, but they have the gun, you don't. And so to remember all of that, frankly, treat them no differently from the way you might treat an overbearing bully in the schoolyard. I mean, you don't really provoke or go in, even though it's unfair that they're exerting some kind of control, you have ways of interacting with them. Now, the nice thing is that we know that 95% or more of police stops do not wind up with problems. Now, we also know that Blacks are more likely to be pulled over for no reason. And that's not just police, though. I want to emphasize that the talk for our children should not just be focused on how we interact with police. A little white girl who all crossed up real early in life. That's how I learned. I had a lovely neighbor. We lived in a white neighborhood, in an old neighborhood with homes built in the 30s and 40s. And we had alleys going all among them. And it was an in-town neighborhood, a block from the high school. And also on our block was where the local symphony performed or practiced in an old firehouse. So the alley, I would go through the alley to go to the youth orchestra with my viola 5 doors down from our house, and then in the other direction, 1 block to school. And when I was little, one day my father was looking out on our patio, and a friend of mine, a white girl a little bit younger than me who lived right behind us, she had taken something away from me. And like kids do, I had chased her, and then I grabbed whatever it was from her, and I looked up and saw my father screaming for me to come in. And I thought, well, what's wrong? I mean, we're a family of justice. Somebody takes your stuff. She's a friend. No harm, no foul. And my father was addressing how this young girl might know, quote, the ways of the world. And what he meant by that was understanding that all you have to do is be a white person and say something bad about a black person, especially a black man, and boom, we have to kill a mockingbird all over again. So the talk is as useful in the workplace when you're an adult as it is when you're encountering police as a motorist or when you're playing with your white neighbor as a child.
Now, but the experience, of how you perceive law enforcement and the justice system is different depending on your socioeconomic status. But anyone can get stopped. So does it really affect you in terms of whether you're wearing a suit or whether you're wearing baggy jeans and an oversized T-shirt?
No, I think for honest black people, we all are frightened when we see the blue light. I am. Even though I've had only a handful of negative encounters with police officers, it's frightening because, there are people who are over you. Of course, getting a letter from a government inspector can be frightening, too, if that shows up, or people who are in communication with the IRS or things like that, or lawyers who get notifications from the Office of Disciplinary Counsel. Any kind of authority who is presumed to think you've done something wrong is a concern, but it doesn't matter whether you're in baggy pants or a suit. We don't want to forget that across the South, according to Taylor Branch and his Pulitzer Prize-winning Civil Rights History, Parting the Waters, America in the King Years, we know from that book, and he's a white historian, that the Southern police forces and fire departments were full of members of the Ku Klux Klan well into the 1960s. And so that's why when Martin Luther King was sentenced to the Georgia chain gang, it was so scary because the police were going to be over him and they took him away and we didn't know where he was. And it's been a terrorism. Police have had license to terrorize, and their deputies too. And they've destroyed black communities like Greenwood, where John Hope Franklin's father was, deputized white people, vigilantes, where there was no crime, and there's no more Greenwood Black Business District. In Wilmington, North Carolina, too, or Rosewood in Florida. So it doesn't matter whether, in fact, if you're wearing a suit, you may have to have an extra measure of beat down for being the uppity Negro.
And Dwayne, the same question to you then. Do you think that socioeconomics plays any role in terms of how you're going to be treated by police?
I absolutely do. And first of all, let me say that I respect the professor. I read his bio, Professor. I am a fan of yours, your work. You are incredible. I would say I kind of disagree a little bit. And the little bit is, the part I do agree is, when you're a black man, no matter what, you can be in a suit, you can be in a sweat, and you could still get the same level of treatment depending on who that officer is. It really depends on who the officer is. However, there have been studies done that shows there's a significant correlation that exists between a police reaction and the action of the suspect. It talks about the age of the suspect. It talks about what the person is wearing. It talks about their movement. It talks about, their mannerisms. It talks about a lot of things that can kind of, whether it's prejudice or whether it's dehumanization, there are a lot of factors that go into how police are looking at the potential person that they are stopping. So I do believe your physical presence has an outcome. And I think it's just as simple as, if I'm walking down the street and I see 4 or 5 black guys walking toward me, it really depends on, what are they looking like? Because I'm judging them, and we all do that. We all have prejudice. We all judge. And so a police officer does the same exact thing. So I do believe it does matter. So, for instance, if I see 3 black boys walking down the street and, jeans and whatnot, their button-down shirt, and 3 black guys with saggy pants with their hair cocked to the side, it's going to create a different reaction in me, and I believe it'll create a different reaction in law enforcement as well.
So you say in your book that the universal aim should be building mutual respect between self, community, and authority. And it's about personal responsibility, integrity, collective action, and accountability. Expound on that a little bit for me.
Sure. Well, mutual respect is just what that first word says. It has to be mutual. That means that the police officers are more so responsible for creating that respect. However, as a citizen, we have responsibility in that encounter as well. And I say that based on your words, your tone, your body action, your language, etc., you have an ability and you have a responsibility in that encounter. Ultimately, although my work is with young people, and it's not just about police encounters, it's about preparing for life. It's about being intelligent, productive citizens, being able to take care of yourself, your family, and your community. Law enforcement is just one aspect of that. So in order to understand that the long-term goal is not just to get home safely, but it's also to get to high school safely. It's to graduate high school safely. It's to go to college and graduate college safely and to become productive citizens. So there are some things that you need to do, not just respecting police, but respecting authority, respecting your teachers, respecting people in general. So that's the level of operation. What I'm trying to do in my book is help to restore humanity, because this police community piece is just one aspect of what's happening in our society.
Okay, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Have you given the talk to your children? Have you had an encounter with police where you learned how to deal with it and it was a positive outcome? Give us a call, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. There is a clip I'm going to play from the documentary that talks about the whole idea of the assumption by some that if you are stopped by the police that you are automatically guilty. Let's listen to that and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
I remember recently talking to one of my friends, a Jewish guy, and we were just talking, and he said, he started asking me the questions about some of the things that were happening, and he was like, was any of these guys guilty of a crime? They had to be, right? We don't know the truth. Say Michael Brown. We don't know what happened. And he said, and I asked him, I said, have you ever had an altercation with a police officer? He said, no. I said, like, being pulled over, like, what is your conversation like? He said, I've never been pulled over. I mean, like, stopped on the street or in the middle of a fight, or what was your conversation? Never. Wait. I said, so you never got pulled over? I said, yo, what are we talking about here? I said, so you really have no clue about this world that exists right here with you, sitting here with you. I've been through the whole opposite. So you never been arrested? He's like, never. I'm like, yo, you have no idea the country that you live in, because you're living in a protected situation. We're out here in a war. It's hard to explain that to somebody who's never even had a police officer say, stand back.
That was the artist Nas speaking during the documentary The Talk, which is coming on PBS this coming Monday, February the 20th at 9 p.m. here on WHRO TV 15 and PBS across the nation. But is it a different world, Amos? Are there two different worlds in terms of experience? And if you are constantly stopped over and over and over again, yet you're told, you have to act a certain way and do a certain thing, doesn't that level of frustration rise to a point where there could be more of a negative outcome?
Yes, especially if someone reaches you on the wrong day at the wrong time. The reason and thank you, Dwayne, for your wonderful book and contributions on this. The experience of people who are more living in an inner city underclass are going to be a lot different and the resources to deal with oppression from somebody who's living in a more upscale context, in a more privileged Black identity. The sameness, of course, is in that, Black people, it's the reason we related to Barack Obama, who's relatively privileged. His being and presenting as a Black man certainly gave him a set of experiences that made him identify very readily with Black men than the way other people could. I remember my father, speaking of the wrong time, we grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, and my father had driven my older sister back to school at Fisk, which was about a 3.5-hour drive from Lexington, Kentucky, down in Nashville. Mm-hmm. And he had gotten back as a school teacher and pastor, and he had arrived back in our neighborhood, which was in a white area of town. And he had just gone by, ironically, Dunbar High School, which, by the way, is the only Dunbar in a white area. And there's a story behind that. That's because of some things that we were able to do when they closed the school in the 60s. But the new Dunbar is in a white area. That was my school. And Daddy had just passed the school late at night on Man of War Boulevard and saw sirens. And he tells this story, and he said, okay, that was it for me. I was done. And he pulled over and got out of the car and was really just fed up, survived segregated schools, had his tax dollars taken because, that's what happened to us when we paid for the white universities that we couldn't go to and inferior white people got to go. So there's all this going on, systematic discrimination, denial of employment opportunities, your children mistreated, all that. And then here comes the police officer for you when you know you haven't done anything wrong. And my father, who's a Baptist preacher, said that was the grace of God because I got out of there ready for a situation. And the cop got out of the car, and it was a Black female police officer. And she said, sir, it looked like you had weaved a bit in the road. Now, of course, my father, being a Baptist preacher in the South, is a complete non-drinker, but Daddy does get sleepy. And the fact that she was a Black woman made it a completely different kind of encounter. And it also provides a good story for us to remember that these are public safety people putting it on the line. I don't want us to get distracted that a lot of the problems that uniquely and more severely affect people who are less privileged are there across their lived experience anyway. Everything is harder for poor people. There's a great scholar, Andre Smith, I think he teaches at Widener Law School. He's a tax scholar. And Andre, who's brilliant, wrote a law review article entitled, "The Internal Revenue Code Don't Care About Poor Black People." And what you find is that Black people are over-enforced by the tax man and pay more in penalties, like we do with everything. I mean, like just every single aspect. So the policing and guns are just part of that. There really is. There are some issues of degree, but all in all, we're basically stuck in a situation where people don't want us around. They don't want us to have anything, it seems. This is pretty verifiable. I have an employment discrimination practice. People would rather pay you to leave and be out of the way than to make America greater. And that's really where we've been since 1620 when we were dumped here as imports. It hasn't really changed much.
So, Dwayne, when you talk to young people, do they feel put upon, as Nas was talking about?
Absolutely. Here's what's interesting, though, because my company, we've done mentoring programs in the city of Chicago as well as in the suburbs. And believe it or not, there is a big difference. What the professor just said is very interesting because my students in the suburbs, they have a bit of a different perspective. They feel as though, and these are Black students, they feel as though the police will be a little bit more fair with them. They feel as though they have a little bit more rights with them. They feel as though they're a little bit more free. And this is not about color. This is about that socioeconomic status that our professor just spoke about. My students in Chicago, they'll tell you real quick, F the police. We don't trust them. We don't like them. We run when we see them. So that is very interesting. But it goes back to me, part of it has to be the adult engagement and the adult encounters because a lot of parents in the inner city, they tell their kids, if you see the police, run. I've heard kids tell me, if police disrespect me, I'm going to disrespect them. I said, well, where do you get that from? They said, well, my mama told me if someone's disrespectful to you, you disrespect them back. I'm like, oh, my God. She's not giving you good advice. I think she loves you, but I don't think she's thinking of every scenario that's going to work well in your case. So, yeah, poverty sucks. Poverty is a curse, and I think that the people who happen to be in that situation, yeah, I do believe things are a lot harder for them, and I do believe police treat them differently. And there was a thing I think I heard on NPR radio in New York when the police had to get a quota or meet their tickets or whatnot. They went to the poor neighborhoods because they knew that these people were not going to resist. They could find additional charges where they never went to the wealthy neighborhoods to get additional tickets.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about the talk, the conversation African American and Latino families have with their children about interacting with police. Our guests include Dwayne Bryant, author of The Stop, Improving Police and Community Relations, and Amos Jones, associate professor of law at Campbell University Law School. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Chris joins us from the Eastern Shore. Hi, Chris. You're on the air.
How you doing?
Doing good.
I would just like to just echo what the brother was saying earlier. I think it's just a matter of perspective and just parenting. Me, myself, I'm from the Eastern Side of Virginia. It's a smaller, rural area, but we all know that in certain areas, being black men, being young black people, that you should probably not hang around there, not hang around gas stations or even schools or restaurants. I can recall I graduated high school in 2008. I can recall having, meetings after football games, everyone kind of gathering around, and the black crowd, we kind of gather around McDonald's, and right across the highway at the plaza, it was closed and everything. The white kids would go, and they got big trucks. Everybody's got, big four-wheelers and things like that, and they're drinking and being rowdy and things like that. But the police would only come over to McDonald's and clear us out. It's...
Clear us out, meaning clear out just the black kids.
Excuse me?
You said clear, when you say clear us out, you're talking about the black kids.
Out of them, just come around and, all right, we need you guys to go home. You're loitering, you're hanging out here. And, right across the street, we're like, so, hey, what about this? And, there was always that case every other Friday night. And, parenting in perspective, me, myself, I was raised, be calm, just think clearly, don't not look him in the eyes, don't look down, don't, have yourself feeling powerless or inferior or whatever. But at the same time, understand that you're kind of, by default in a subservient position. If you want to make it out with your life, you should probably be cool. Okay. And
all right, let's let our guests respond. Chris, thanks so much for the call. We appreciate it. Dwayne, he says, considering the circumstances, you should probably just be cool.
You know what? I agree. The first law of nature is self-preservation. So the first thing you want to do is live and survive. And it's so unfortunate that we have to have that kind of thought as a black people. But my deal is, let's deal with reality. If that's the reality, let's play based on the reality, but let's create a better future and a better world. So, yes, you want to get home, but I also tell my young people that there's accountability for these police officers. So let's say that across the street, the white kids, and I totally agree with your caller just said, they have the big pickup trucks, the big tires, the music, they're drinking underage, but they don't get, harassed by the police. The police comes over to harass black folks. Well, my deal is this. Find that police's name and badge. Make a report. Now, that's going to probably come back against you because the police will probably, be driving around trying to find you to harass you more. Make another report because at some point, there has to be accountability. I do believe, and I say in my book, that 90% of officers, I believe, are good, decent people. A lot of people tell me I'm being very optimistic. However, let's say if 10% are racist, 10% are dehumanizers, that means that's a lot of folks that can create a lot of havoc. Those officers need to be out of the police force. There was a recent report by the FBI that many Ku Klux Klan members are now joining and infiltrating law enforcement. So if this is happening, we have to be honest about it, that some of these officers are racist and they are out to get you, to kill you, to incarcerate you, or to change your life dramatically. So then you have to be wise when you have the encounter, but also you can't be so afraid that you don't stand for your rights and you don't hold them accountable, because if we don't hold police officers accountable, we'll continue to get the same garbage that we've got.
Okay, let's go to Greg in Virginia Beach. Hi, Greg. You're on the air.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon to you and your guests.
Thank you.
My frustration is that why does a citizen have to be the adult in the room? I mean, we're talking about people who could take your life, who can put you in jail. That's a lot of authority. And with that authority comes a lot of responsibility. And that is what the the broader society does not want to charge police officers with. We want to always talk about the 5% or 10% of police officers are bad and the other 90 or 95 are good. Well, you know what? I disagree with that. You're a poor police officer if you have crooks and potential murderers working with you and you do not see them working and sitting next to you. You're not reporting them. You're not turning them in. That's bad policing.
Okay. Thank you, Greg, for that response. Amos, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, we're talking about the blue wall of silence, and, you know, there are now blacks in the blue wall of silence because the New York City Police Department now does stop and frisk, but they're majority minority. We are in what Dr. Doris Wilkinson, the professor emeritus of sociology at the University of Kentucky, would call integration dilemmas in a racist culture. In the good old days, black people in these environments could raise their moral voices and refine and perfect the institutions for the betterment of all. But these days, black people are so beat down economically that you just need to get the quick check and shut up. And what that does is cause these problems of a perennial and perpetual racism and oppression matrix that people are stuck in. And judges are no different, by the way. We have a number of state and federal judges who go ahead, and administrative judges who are black, who beat people down just like bad police officers. And I can name names. That's where my scholarship is going, in fact, because people need to be outed. So, I mean, it's the adults in the room are not all that reliable either. I'm becoming of the mind lately, when we look at the problems of how we have to make all of these abnormal adjustments to give our sons the talk, to have our daughters expect to have to date somebody with a record, to have men who are taken out of the system because white teachers don't want to deal with black boys' verve, which we have. That's in the literature. See Jawanza Kunjufu's series, Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, that talks about how they try to take out black boys by the time you're 9 years old. What could be more evil than that? So here we are. I'm beginning to think that maybe what we just need to do is follow the Abraham Lincoln approach. That is, give us some reparations and we will leave and find somewhere to go because nobody wants us. And, you know, you think about my employment discrimination practice, that's actually, it makes everybody happy because black people get beat down at work. Nobody wants to promote them or treat them the same. Then when they leave, we get them paid and quieted and everybody's happy because nobody wanted us around. That's what this all boils down to. How can police beat down black children? How can we allow that? How can we have judges who facilitate the prison industrial complex? How can we have no more Martin Luther King coming forward in the face of this nonsense? And in an increasingly economically oppressive world, because at least it used to be, y'all, when you were young, you didn't have to tank $100,000 in your education that's not dischargeable in bankruptcy anymore. You could pay my father paid $60 a semester to go to the University of Kentucky at the same time as his older brother paid $3,000 a year to go to the Yale Law School in 1958. So see, you were free because you came out and you weren't broke and you didn't have to go make these economic compromises. But we've gotten all crossed up, poor, paycheck to paycheck, and then a police state. It's bad.
Let's talk to Victoria in Hampton. Hi, Victoria. You're on the air.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm actually, I grew up in South Carolina in a small town that was mostly minorities. My dad was a police officer. I had friends that grew up around the police officer. So this has never been a discussion that I'd had as a white person.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have two sons. And I hate to ask the question because I know you guys are focusing on helping the black community.
That's okay.
But as a white woman who is raising sons who have friends or, you know, a vast, you know, across the range of minorities, and we're military, so we get to see all sorts of people. They make these deep connections. And the topic has come up, especially in the recent election, about race. And my sons are just confused and they're hurt and they don't understand. And I want to make them as passionate about activism, as positive an influence in everyone's lives as they can be, but I don't know how to have that discussion because it had never had to be had with me. And I just was really hoping to get your guest input.
Fantastic. We will start with Dwayne.
Can you rephrase that question for me?
In other words, she's asking, since her children are white, but they have friends that are of the rainbow, of all different nationalities and races. And because they're in the military, they interact with a lot of different people. And she wants to teach her sons more about activism and how does she help them to help their minority friends.
Oh, that's one. First of all, thank you, caller. That's a beautiful question. Here's my answer. And when I do speak to white parents and they have the same concern, what can we do? I said the first thing they need to understand, because a lot of white people have white privilege and they don't even consider it privilege. They don't even know it's privilege because they're so used to having it. It's just normal to them. So the first thing I say is, if you see an injustice being done to your friends, to your people who may not look like you, then the first thing you have to do is speak up and speak out. For instance, a friend of mine told me that he was in the car with his white friend, and the police pulled him over. Now, the white person was driving, but the officer asked for the black guy's ID as well as the white guy's ID. And the black guy said, well, why do you need my ID? And the police immediately got belligerent with the black guy, told him to get out of the car, pat them down, etc. Long story short, the white officer ended up, letting them go, and the black boy was pissed. He was angry. And the white guy was like, man, why are you upset? He was just being a jerk. And he did not even see that white privilege was the fact that he's the one driving. He didn't get pulled out of the car. He was treated with respect. So what do we tell our white counterparts? Justice is justice. It's not black and white. It's wrong versus right. In the case of wrong, if it's a white officer, then that white child needs to remember that badge, remember that name, and to be able to file a complaint, because in essence, you have to advocate for your brethren. And although we're different colors in this country, we are the same citizenry. We are all Americans, and you have to advocate so that we all get fair treatment. That's what I think.
Okay. Amos, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it. I think when you have an interracial group, it's good to be aware of that. Sadly enough, I've seen these occur, and it just becomes such a huge burden. The black people in the interracial group, because you can't really share all your experiences without being frequently targeted for being unpleasant. And that's why we all go to the black table in the schools we go to and go to our churches and things. There's just not a lot of room for interacting. People don't want to hear it. But, that's being black in America, the chips that won't melt down.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Justin joins us from Hampton. Hi, Justin. You're on the air.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for taking my call. My question actually goes towards Dwayne. He spoke earlier, just a little while ago, that his company, the company that he works for, deals with youth in the inner city in the Chicago area, in the suburbs. I originally grew up, joined the military, but I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, just outside of the city, and I survived it. And here in the last 2 decades or decade and a half since I've been in the military, it's gotten a lot worse. Gentrification in Chicago has displaced a lot of the inner city youth or inner city families, and Rockford's got even worse. I have family in South Chicago, even in the Cicero area. But what I would like to ask is, there is a sense of loyalty. You were speaking earlier about when a parent teaches a child exactly how they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to interact with authority. If they disrespect you, disrespect them back. Now, if somebody comes along like yourself and tells them that what they're doing is not conductive for a civilized society, right? And there's that level of disloyalty or dishonesty to their support group, which is their mother or their father. Now, how do you combat that as a counselor or as a concerned citizen, as a mentor? Okay. And I'm a Latino boy, I'm Mexican, Native American, and when I was growing, and this is another thing, when I was growing up, I was in and out of jail, juvenile from the age of 11 until a year before I joined the military. Dropped out of school, got my GED. The system was against me, being a brown-skinned boy growing up, but there was a level of, especially in the area that I grew up, it was a badge of honor to actually be able to have this sense of braggadocious mentality of being in and out of jail. Like, hey, what are you in for? And whenever I would go back to jail, it was almost like a cycle. The same boys were in and out of jail during the same time frame, whether it was during the summer or during the winter. We would meet up almost exactly the same time, whether they're Latino or African American.
Okay, Justin, we get your point, and I want to get, with the phones are lit up, so I want to get some more calls in, and I want Dwayne to have time to answer your call. So let's get a response from Dwayne. Go ahead,
okay.
Dwayne. Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked it. Here's my answer. I tell children when they say, my mother and my father told me, I say, listen, I believe your parents love you, and I believe they want you to be successful and make it home. But I also know from working with over 15,000 students that not all parents give children the best advice. They give you the best advice from what they know, but they don't know everything. And I tell them, listen, just take this as a suggestion and a recommendation, but you have to do what you think is best. But I think what I'm saying is better. When you have an encounter with law enforcement, being respectful is the best solution and the best, even if they're being belligerent. One man said earlier, why does the citizen have to be the adult? Because if you're dealing with a child, even if that child has a badge, a gun, and authority, then the citizen has to be the adult, because that's the only thing that a child will understand is intelligent behavior, conversation, hopefully. So I would tell them that I think their parents love them, but here's my advice and my suggestion. Fortunately, with my students, we have a great relationship. They know Mr. Bryant would not tell them anything wrong to do. I would not put them in harm's way. So it gives them another counterpart. The last thing is, you mentioned being in juvenile, and it's like a badge of honor. See, I believe the problem with that is, in the black community, black men are no longer being black men. We're no longer holding ourselves to a high standard. We're no longer holding ourselves accountable, our family, our neighborhoods, our women. So we say we have ignorant conversation with young people, and we are the ones who put these black boys on the street in gangs. So we're the ones that allow them to think that manhood is how many women you got, how much drugs you can sell, what kind of car you drive. And that is absolutely have nothing to do with manhood. It's about responsibility. Are you bettering yourself, your family, your community? And if you're not a man. And I tell these gangbangers, I had a confrontation. I say, listen, you guys are the sellouts. You guys are the coons. You want to call me a coon and a sellout because I'm trying to teach our young people the best way to be, but you're selling drugs in the neighborhood. You're destroying our neighborhood. And you have these young boys looking up to you, thinking that this is what they want to do. You're the coon. You're the sellout, because they think this is the right way to go, and it is absolutely destroying our neighborhood.
Wow, we have a lot of positives and powerful things going on in this conversation. Let's go to Anthony in Hampton. Hi, Anthony. You're on the air.
When he went up, they
Anthony?
My son. Yes.
No, go ahead. You're on the air.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm recently. My son got into a little trouble here recently. His mother and I are not together, but we are co-parenting. My son graduated from high school last year, and he didn't go directly to college because he wasn't really sure what he wanted to do. I'm retired Army. I do have postgraduate degree. As such, his mother does also. And actually, he got in trouble with two of his friends. They happen to be white, and when I got to court with him, I had no idea who the boys were. Like I said, we co-parents. I don't really know, a lot of his friends. And they had a possession charge. It wasn't a great amount of marijuana, but the first two boys, they basically threw it out. They gave them non-process. And because of them, that my assumption was that would be the same thing for my son. Both the kids were white, and when it came to my son, they gave him first offenders. So now he's in the system.
And your son is African American?
Yes.
Okay.
And I wanted him to, go in the military, which is still an option for him. But he's never been in trouble, never been arrested. He doesn't even have his driver's license. He's working on that, and I mean, completely has never been in the system.
Well,
my son had to get fingerprinted, and And it's just really unfortunate.
Yeah. Let's let I want to go to Amos about that, Amos, because does he have recourse? What can he do? Anything?
Yeah, you have to fight. That's why it's so important just in these traffic stops to cooperate as much as possible. You can still wind up getting the short end of the stick because once you get a record, it's much harder. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Now, I'm not blaming your son at all. But there are ways, I say that to point out there are ways to get around to get things expunged or reduced or even dismissed. But it's a process, and it often costs money. And that's another way that they get us, because the average black family has no wealth. So how do we pay for these legal problems? It's all really just so exploitative. And there's a class action lawsuit in Virginia about these driver's licenses they were taking from black people. And so it's just so much. So I think that there are ways around it. It's going to require legal support and legal fees and legal time. That's time we could be spending on other projects to advance our people as well. So they really spread us thin and gotten us distracted by these unfair arrests. It's unfortunate. So,
Amos, let me ask you, when you are stopped by the police, we know, put your hands on the wheel, don't have anything in, if you have a weapon, you need to tell them. But tell me specifically, should you ask why you're being stopped? Should you say anything, or should you just sit there and let the officer do all the talking?
I don't ask any questions. And if I'm asked, do you know what you did? And often I do. And I'll admit it, frankly, because that's also where you get a warning. I have been pulled over 4 times over the last 17 years in traffic, and I was given grace 3 of those 4 times. The other time, I got it dismissed. I went to a hearing. The black hearing examiner, it was a white officer who was polite, Secret Service officer near the White House. I was filing a black woman's veterans appeal at the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit and went through a green light, but it was not a directional because the other people were slow. So I went to fight it at the hearing. It was a black woman hearing examiner, a very nice white officer. He showed up, and the black woman did me different from everybody else. She let him go first. That's not the way it works when you're the accused. Then she didn't let me rebut his testimony. How do you not get to confront your accuser under 4th and 5th Amendments? But you know what? I didn't tell her what she had done. I shook my head and thought, I'll just appeal constitutional violations. And I appealed, and it was all tossed because she violated my constitutional rights. So that's the way we have to do it. Now, that's not fair for me to impute that savvy. I went to Harvard Law School and Columbia Journalism School. I'm a National Merit Scholar. I'm 5'7", 155 pounds, and not dark-skinned. There's a lot of bias that's not operating toward me, even though I'm black. So I don't expect other African Americans to be able to finesse these things. I have not paid a ticket in 17 years because then I rarely get stopped. I'm a good driver, but you cooperate. And when you admit it, the last 2 times I went through a light after it turned red in front of Harvard Law School, he said, sir, he marked me as Hispanic. It was dark on the ticket, but he gave me a warning. I said, officer, I went right through that light. I drove back from Hartford and should not have. That was just wrong. And he came back with a warning. So, there are just, there are ways to deal with human people. These officers like to be respected, too. They're going around with a badge. A lot of them were in the military. Yeah. They appreciate order. And, I'm and I really do like what officers do for our country. Because I'll tell you this, last point. If you've ever needed to call the police real quick, one thing I love about America that they don't have everywhere, at least the neighborhoods I live in, those officers roll up in there in 60 seconds, guns blazing. Yeah. They're going to take care of business when you need them that way, at least in my neighborhood.
Okay.
So,
Amos, we're down to 3 minutes, so I want to make sure that I get Dwayne in also, because I want to ask you, Dwayne, in terms of the fact, Amos brought up a very, very good point, that a lot of people don't know the system, so they don't know how to appeal, so forth and so on. So should that also be a part of our consciousness as we navigate this situation? Dwayne.
Absolutely. And parents should, this is a shameless plug, but parents should get the book, AboutTheStop.com. Chapter 3, I talk about when I was pulled over in high school. The officer, white female, pulled me over when a friend of mine jumped in my car, and she said we were speeding, but she stopped me at a stop sign. I was doing an internship in the state's attorney's office at that time in high school, and I was angry, and the attorney told me how to, take the cop to court, how to research the statutes, take pictures of what happened, and I took the officer to court. The officer lied right there on the stand in front of the judge. I talked about that in the book, and I shared with the judge all of the evidence. I had a mechanic's report that my car was a 4-cylinder Chevette. They would not have been speeding at a stop sign, and I won. The case was thrown out. But our young people think that when a police officer's word is the last word, it is not the final word, because the police officer has a boss, their boss has a boss, then there are judges that you have to go before. So if I would have been, not aware enough to know my rights, enough to know that even as a child, I can take that officer to court. And a lot of our people, that's why I tell parents, you need to know your rights. I wish we had more people like the Professor Amos who's on the phone, because he is powerful. But unfortunately, the vast majority of our people do not know their rights. They do not know how to follow up. They just think that whatever the police says is the final word, and most times it is not.
Okay, and you know what? With that, we are out of time. That's Dwayne Bryant, the author of The Stop, Improving Police and Community Relations. Thank you so much, Dwayne, for joining us. And Amos Jones, Associate Professor of Law at Campbell University Law School. And we so appreciate you being on the show also. Thank you very, very much. And we'll be right back.
Hello, this is Spike Lee. What's happening? And you listen to Another View.
We've had a very meaningful and lively conversation today about The Talk, and the conversation continues on Tuesday, February 21st at 6:30 at the Fort Monroe Theater in Hampton. It's free and everyone is invited, but we would like you to register. So go to whro.org/talkaboutrace to sign up. The town hall is all about the audience. It's your chance to speak your mind about this issue and also to learn from each other. We will have law enforcement agencies represented, along with our race relations experts, Eric Claville, Michelle Woods-Jones, Jonathan Zura, and Mavelle Valesco. Please come on out and participate. Sign up again at whro.org/talkaboutrace. And let me also encourage you to tune in to WHRO TV 15 on Monday, February the 20th at 9 p.m. for the PBS documentary, The Talk. We will have clips from the documentary to guide our conversation during the town hall. And, we just love hearing from you. So send us an email at contact@anotherviewradio.org if you have some suggestions for shows or if you want to respond to the show you heard today. And don't forget that the podcast is available at at anotherviewradio.org. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Jada Baden answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thank you so much for listening to Another View.